Hi everyone, my name is Veronica and I'm a horticultural research assistant with Botanic Gardens of Sydney at the Mount Annan site. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land I work on, the Dharawal people, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to any First Nations people watching. Please note the following information is intended as a guide only, and you should always check and follow the regulations for your state or territory. Today we're going to be talking about best practice in myrtle rust management, what that looks like, the situation for fungicide use as it currently stands, and some of the challenges we face in implementing best practice. It can be tempting to think that cultural practices aren't that important, but they play a key role in reducing the need for fungicides and therefore the risk of myrtle rust developing resistance to the few chemicals we have available to us. When receiving new known susceptible species or even unknown susceptibility species, either from the wild or other organisations, it's advisable to quarantine those plants for a period. 4 weeks allows time for observation for both pests and diseases, an initial spray if required, and then a follow-up spray. Where and how to arrange in-ground susceptible myrtaceae is important. Consider proximity to public areas, access for spraying and maintenance, and of course, suitability to the plants. Grouping susceptible species together can make spraying easier and more efficient. In the image here, you can see these rhodomyrtus have been planted in a corner bed with path access on 2 sides. There's enough space between plantings to allow good airflow, and they've been pruned to around 8 foot for ease of spraying. In this situation, they're critically endangered plants that are part of a meta collection and a broader conservation strategy. So we're not so concerned about the aesthetics, more the preservation of the genetic material. These plants are irrigated with soaker hoses rather than impact sprinklers to reduce moisture on the leaf. Morning watering also allows for faster evaporation and therefore drier conditions. The whole bed is well mulched to retain moisture where it's needed, and the exclusion of underplanting reduces humidity. These methods all contribute to unfavourable conditions for myrtle rust in this garden situation. Highly susceptible species can also be used strategically in the landscape as sentinel plantings to provide an early warning system for more important plantings. For example, planting downwind of a shade house or hill planting. Moisture on the leaf surface is necessary for spore germination, so choosing irrigation such as shrublers and hand watering instead of overhead irrigation in a nursery situation will also make conditions less favourable for the disease. Undercover areas in the nursery are ideal for potted plants if they're available. If despite these measures you find you have infection on a small amount of foliage, you can carefully remove, bag and dispose of the affected material. Restrict access to the area to reduce spread until after fungicide treatment. At the point of infection, it's best to use a systemic curative fungicide. Follow-up spraying should also be planned as it's unlikely a single spray will be sufficient to control infection. I've found best results achieved by spraying all surfaces, even when using systemic fungicides. Also consider using a surfactant or adjuvant to optimise results. In the nursery collections I manage, I monitor very closely and regularly, say every couple of days, so that I pick up infection as soon as possible. When I find myrtle rust, sometimes I'll remove the affected foliage and then wait to see if the disease spreads. If conditions improve, for example, becoming drier, then I may not need to take any further action. If I decide to spray, perhaps because of high humidity or rainfall is set to continue, I'll try to do so quickly, usually within a week to 10 days. I understand for many people and situations this won't be possible, but treating plants as quickly as possible will reduce the overall spore load and help reduce the risk of ongoing infection. The nursery and garden industry myrtle rust management plan was developed for production nurseries and retailers in 2011 and revised in 2013. It provides recommendations for fungicide programs according to environmental conditions and stage of growth. It describes in simple terms strategies for managing susceptible species in the nursery environment, but many of the principles can be adapted and applied to in-ground plantings. To avoid resistance to fungicides, a rotation program is recommended. Rotation is based on the mode of action for an active constituent, which consists of a number, letter, or combination of both, as you can see in column 4. The mode of action is displayed on the product label. If we were to select on the brand name or even the active constituent alone, we'll run into problems. Bayfidan and Saprol, for example, have different trade names and actives, but are in fact the same mode of action, in this case 3. So ideally you wouldn't follow one another. Over time, some chemicals have been withdrawn from the market or their trade names have changed. For example, Bayfidan, or more accurately triadimenol, is now available under the trade names Surefire Triadimenol, Asensi Triadimenol, and Campbell Tridam. For a list of current fungicides registered for use for myrtle rust, search the APVMA Public Chemical Registration Information Service by pest, product name, or active constituent for the most up-to-date information. I also want to alert you to the fact that at this time Plantvax or oxycarboxyn is no longer being manufactured and to my knowledge is unable to be purchased. As far as I'm aware, there are no other oxycarboxyn or mode of action 7 alternatives available, which makes it extremely difficult, if not impossible, to implement best practice fungicide rotation for myrtle rust. I've raised the issue with the relevant industry bodies nationally and in New South Wales, and I would be interested to hear others' experiences around this. In the meantime, we have an extremely limited number of options in systemic curative fungicides. Essentially, the only remaining modes of action available are 3, 11, or the 2 combined. All of this makes good cultural practice even more important. I've borrowed this graphic from CropLife because it does a great job of showing how fungicide resistance develops through the repeated use of the same mode of action. At the first spray, there are some resistant fungi that survive. If the same mode of action is repeated, those survivors reproduce, leading to a resistant population. Fungicides for treatment of myrtle rust can be either registered on-label or off-label. If off-label, then a minor use permit is required in all states and territories except Victoria, unless otherwise stated. Victoria's control of use legislation means a permit is not necessarily required to legalise off-label use. Because minor use permits are a legal document, they must be in date and strictly followed in tandem with product labels. I would advise checking the validity of your permit just before spraying, as they're regularly surrendered, which renders them invalid even when they haven't expired. They provide detailed information on application rates, critical use comments, and additional conditions of use. Many minor use permits discuss resistant management, including how often a product can be used on a crop, in a season, or over a year. Protective fungicides can be used in tandem with systemic curative treatments to prolong the time between infections, for example, pairing mancozeb with triadimenol. Don't forget that many fungicides and insecticides are compatible, so pests and diseases can be treated at once, saving time and effort. Always test new chemicals if they haven't been used on a particular species before. If the collection is too important to risk, then testing on a common species in the same genus may give an indication of any potential problems. Thank you very much for listening.